Hello there and welcome back to another video here on Wrist Watch Revival. My name is Marshall. Thank you so much for coming along. And boy, oh boy, this time on the bench we have a watch that I kind of can't believe that I'm holding in my hand. This is an absolutely incredible piece that you just don't see. I've never actually seen one of these in real life before. I was approached by somebody who had lost his grandfather, and in a drawer at Grandpa's house was this. And this is a Rolex GMT Master. It's a reference 6542, which means it's the original GMT Master, which is one of Rolex's most popular models. And this one dates all the way back to 1958 when that model first came out. And there's a few things to talk about with this watch. First off, take a look at that crystal. I have never, ever seen a crystal like that before. But really importantly is the bezel. So you take a look at that bezel. That bezel is made of bakelite. And that is a precursor to plastic. It is a material that was used in manufacturing for a while before the plastics that we use today were developed. And bakelite has some really cool properties to it, but it also is very, very fragile. And as a result, these watches are extremely rare with the original bakelite bezel that you can see here. Now, take a look. It also has luminous material in the bezel, as well as, of course, the hands and the dots. And that is going to make our life very tricky here because these bakelite bezels are very, very prone to cracking. And so we're going to have to be really careful. Now, with regards to the lume, that's the glow-in-the-dark material on these watches, check this out. So I got myself a Geiger counter. This measures radioactivity, and I'm going to put it over one of my watches. This is a Omega Speedmaster. It has a little bit of lume on it, but it's modern. And as you can see, it puts off 11 on this thing. Now I'm going to put it on our new friend here, and watch this. So yeah, that's another thing, is that these were lumed with radium. And radium is, of course, radioactive. It's actually quite a dangerous material, and it has to be handled with care on watches like this. It also emits radon gas, and it can be highly poisonous if you ingest it into your system. So you have to be really, really careful. On top of that, you can see that this watch was extremely well worn with a lot of dirt in and around the bezel and the case back. Also, the crown won't turn. It is stuck in place. Also, the watch isn't running. We have no idea how long it's been sitting for, but it's obvious that it's been a very long time. I believe that this watch was worn. Yeah, I can't even turn the bezel either. That's not good. That this watch was worn until it stopped, and then it was put into a drawer. That's what it looks like to me. And this thing was worn properly. We can take off the bracelet, which is also missing an end link and therefore broken. Yeah, so we've got a true restoration on our hands here, but these watches are really special. They're very difficult to find in this type of condition in the wild. This is very much like a barn find if you're used to cars where they go to some farm and then all of a sudden somebody's got some rare Ferrari hidden underneath. That's what we're looking at here. Now, the first order of business in order to take this thing apart is the most nerve-wracking. We have to take off this bezel. I am going to use my special bezel removal tool here to do so, but we have to be so careful because this bakelite can shatter. It cracks really easily. In fact, it's so fragile that Rolex would routinely replace these bezels when you sent them in for service with the more modern one that has an aluminum insert that can't be cracked. And that's another reason why these are so rare and so hard to find, especially with the original bakelite bezel still intact. So I'm taking this really, really slow. And I told the owner there is a chance that this bezel gets cracked. It won't shatter out of the bezel itself or anything, but that it could develop a hairline fracture. But I'm going to be as absolutely careful as possible. This is the type of thing that gets your heart rate going, even though you're sitting at your desk working on a watch. Oh, and there it goes. It fell out. There's that incredibly fractured crystal. Again, I've never seen anything like it. Let's take a look at the bezel. Oh, it looks actually okay. Wow, I think that tool actually did a really good job removing this thing. Oh my goodness, that is such a relief that it came out okay. That bezel can just get cracked so easily. And I'll tell you, one of the big reasons that that was so stressful is because of the price of a watch like this and the effect that a cracked bezel or a missing bezel can have on it. This type of watch, I looked it up, and the ones that I found were selling from between $70,000 to $195,000. Yeah, you heard me right. That much for a watch. That's how special these things are and how rare they are to find. So yeah, a little bit of extra nerves. You can see that the bezel is fitted here. The crystal, excuse me, is fitted with a bezel, and then the ring goes around the outside of that. As you can see, there is a significant amount of dirt and grime under this. I'm going to put this in a box and store it safely away. And in the meantime, we still have to get to business on the movement, because this watch does not run and the crown won't turn. And that means that there could really be anything going on inside here. Let's take a look. The ball, my rubber ball that I use, is not enough to get the back off of this. So we're going to have to use an actual case opening tool here instead. This is a special attachment just for Rolex watches. Ugh. Wow, that is super tight on there. Okay, it did finally come free though. This thing probably hasn't been opened in forever. And I'm really curious to see what's going on the inside. Hopefully there's no rust. Take a look. Ooh, very nice. This is a very old Rolex movement. Oh, that's good sight to see as well. The balance wheel does spin freely. In fact, it looks like it almost wants to run. Taking a look, you can see 1958 was when this watch was produced. And it looks like the automatic winding rotor spins as well. And if that's the case, then I'm going to assume that this crown, the reason that it's stuck is just because there's dirt around the outside. And I'm going to take a little bit of an extreme measure here. I'm going to use a pair of pliers to try to break that dirt free. Carefully. You don't want to overdo this type of thing, of course. Yes, that actually seems to have worked. Just a gentle push, and now this thing does unscrew, which means, of course, that I can take it out. And yeah, you can see why. Look at all that buildup. Boy, this watch was truly worn by its owner. I respect it. I think that's awesome. It looks kind of like the owner might have worn it until it just died. Even though, looking at the inside of the movement, it looks very promising in here. I don't see any major signs of damage or anything like that. So I think we have a good shot of getting this thing running really well. Rolex movements come out by undoing 2 screws, then turning the entire movement assembly, and then it'll just drop right out of the case, just like that. Okay, so now we've got this freed up. I can put the crown and stem back in, and that'll allow me to align the hands so that I can remove them. And one thing I did want to mention is I started a website. I'm really excited about it. I teamed up with a friend of mine, Alex Hansen, and we started a website called sutcliffehansen.com. That's my last name and his last name. And basically it was because I wanted a place to be able to curate toolkits so that I could get, hopefully you, into watchmaking. I think it's an amazing hobby for people that like to have hands-on hobbies and maybe don't have enough room for like a woodworking shop or an auto garage or something like that. You can get a lot of the same feelings and things that you get out of that, but you can do it at your desk at home and all your tools will fit in one box. But one of the things that happened is when I first started doing watchmaking, I was really intimidated by the tools, how many you need, which ones to get. So I curated toolkits. There's beginner ones, entry level. There's add-ons for people that are a bit more advanced. There's also pre-owned and vintage watches and a selection of watch straps that is going to be growing as well. that are some of my favorites, all over at sutcliffehansen.com. And there's a link in the description if you'd like to check that out. I'd appreciate it if you did. Okay, well, the dial comes off pretty easily here. This is just a friction fit dial. This is not the type of dial that has dial screws on it. So that's nice. And there's the calendar ring as well. And I'm just going to put that in a dial holder for safekeeping. And then we can continue with the disassembly of the watch itself. This is the calendar side of the watch. It's a fairly simple calendar mechanism on these old Rolex models. These are non-quickset calendars as well, meaning that you can't advance only the calendar side. You have to wind the watch 24 hours each time for every day you want to move the calendar forward. It's not the most convenient. And there is my cannon pinion removal tool to take off the cannon pinion. It is just friction fit. And you know what? So far, everything's coming apart quite nicely. Now I can take apart the automatic winding bridge and the winding works that's on it. And if you look closely, you can see that the watch has actually started up as well. So crazy enough, it does actually run still. I think it had just gotten gunked up and that's why it wouldn't work. Let's take a look at it on the time grapher and the beautiful sunset as well and see how it's doing. Ooh, pretty low amplitude, only 148 degrees. And the rate looks like it's kind of all over the map. But I'll tell you, that's the kind of thing I'd expect to see on a watch that just needs a service. Meaning, I don't think this thing was broken, dropped, shattered, even though the crystal looks like it was. And if that's the case, I'm very hopeful that we can get this watch running again and into its owner's hands in much better shape than it left. So the first thing we'll do is let down the mainspring. That's where we take the power out of the watch, and then I can take off the balance. This procedure is done first, mainly just to get the balance out of the way. It's a very delicate part and has a spring on it called the balance spring or the hairspring that is really, really touchy, and you don't want screwdrivers to hit it or anything like that. So we just put it out of the way safely. And then I can use this special tool called a Presto tool to remove this wheel that sits on top. This wheel actually is what makes the seconds hand go around. Interestingly, the seconds hand is attached to a pinion, which is in the center of the watch there. And we can actually remove it right now. There it is. The seconds hand attaches to the tip of that, which is kind of interesting. And now we can remove the train wheel bridge as well. And underneath that is the train of wheels. I think it's what a lot of people think about when they think about the insides of a watch. They call them gears, but in watchmaking we call them wheels, these ones. There are gears as well. And there they are right there. That's the fourth wheel. And this one's called the escape wheel. And then there's the center wheel, third wheel, and then the mainspring barrel, which is what I'm going to start taking apart here, just so I can get to the others. That's the ratchet wheel on top. And this is called the crown wheel. It's held in place by two very, very small screws. You can see a significant amount of buildup of old oil in certain parts of the watch as well. Again, desperately needing a service, but that is what I would expect from a watch that's been sitting and had been worn as hard as this one had been. And that center wheel didn't want to come free nicely, and that's another sign that it just needs to be cleaned. It turns out that the oil, especially the oil they used back in the day, now we use full synthetic oils all the time, but before that wasn't the case. When it dries up, it gets gunky, and it actually hinders the performance of the watch. It goes from helping it greatly to actually slowing it down. There's not a lot of neutral there. Okay, I can take out the click spring, being as careful as I can. I don't know where I would find some of these spare parts, and I don't want to know what they would cost. Now we can take off the barrel bridge. And again, you can see the gunk around the top of the barrel. In fact, it looks like it's holding the barrel in place. It's so dried up. Let's see if I can remove it. Oof. Yeah, there it goes. It comes out. It's not horrendous, but that is definitely not what you want to see, and it's going to require a good cleaning. Now we can remove the setting lever screw, and it should just come straight away. Yeah, there it goes. Again, a little bit sticky, but that's kind of what we expect. I mean, the disaster with watches like this is if they've been mishandled, if they've been dropped, or if water gets into them. That's where you're dealing with some real problems. But a watch like this that just needs a good service might need a part or two replaced if they've become excessively worn. But, you know, this is what you hope for with the barn find watches like this. Now we can flip the movement over, and we can take apart the dial side. And this has the keyless works and the motion works on it. And as well as the calendar works, which is what this spring is here. Same with this bar. And this is the keyless works down here. This is what allows you to wind and set the watch. Yeah, these GMTs are really cool. They're designed to let you track an additional time zone when you're traveling. And they have an additional hour hand and then the rotating bezel that lets you modify it so that it can point to a separate time zone. Maybe it's back home, so you can always know what time it is at home if you're out traveling. And apparently these things were made for Pan Am pilots, which is why they used blue and red for that beautiful bezel that we took apart earlier. This is a very hefty spring. I call it the Born to Fly spring because that thing loves to fly away, so I'm always extra careful with those now. You learn your lesson after a few times after of it flying. And there's a setting lever as well. Now we can take apart the mainspring barrel. And I'm curious to see what the mainspring looks like inside. That's actually not terrible. Might still be worth replacing it, though. Of course, all the original parts will be returned to the owner, regardless of whether I replace them in the watch or not. For something special like this, especially that belonged to a family member, you know, I like to keep everything together. I also like to try to keep as many parts original as possible. Oh yeah, there's a nice little layer of grease on the bottom of that, but that's not a huge deal either. And now we've got the automatic winding works to take apart. It is just stunning, the value of these watches, though. I looked it up and I was like, holy smokes. I had quite a chat with the owner about it as well, just so that they knew the implications of me working on a watch like this. Okay, so this is the automatic winding works coming apart now. This is what'll wind the watch when you just wear it day to day, as this one was clearly worn. I would love to know the history of this watch, who wore it, what it was, you know, what was happening while this watch was on that person's wrist all those years. Okay, now it's time for cleaning. So we can put every single part of this watch into the watch cleaning machine baskets. These are little mesh baskets that just keep the parts together. Then they go into a bigger basket that gets put into the watch cleaning machine, which is where the watch is cleaned using solvents and, you know, moving back and forth in the water oscillation of it as well. Before we do that, though, let's also take a look once again at this case, because it's going to need some cleaning. Again, the crystal can just come off. And I do need to clean up the case. I am not going to be refinishing this case. right? This has an absolutely beautiful patina that you can only get after having worn this watch heavy for a lot of years. And I'm not going to be ruining that. Now, this back gasket, though, does look like it needs to be replaced. Oof. Yeah, this is what happens to these gaskets when you don't replace them ever, is they basically turn into plastic, and then they turn into kind of like a tar. And it looks like we caught this one in between. As you can see, it's very brittle, and that's supposed to be a soft rubber gasket. And of course, taking a look at the crystal, well, it's not going to be able to be salvaged. Really crazy pattern of cracking on it, though. I've never seen anything like that. All right, well, now we can get the movement into the watch cleaning machine, as I mentioned before. And yes, the parts are kind of all up against each other in the watch cleaning machine, but it's actually not that big of a deal because they're submersed in liquid, so they don't bang up against each other or anything like that. And as the parts are clean, I did want to say thank you to my patrons over on patreon.com/wristwatchrevival. These are a way to support the content creators that you love. Sometimes it's YouTube videos like this. Sometimes it's music or podcasts or whatever it is, artwork. This is a way that you can help support your favorite content creators so that they keep making the awesome stuff that you love. You know, back in the day, this type of thing wasn't possible. If you wanted to make content, you had to make very heavy mainstream content that was good enough to make it on TV or the radio. Those days are long gone, and Patreon is part of why, because we can now do our own content, even about something as crazy as restoring vintage watches, and still make it into a living. So thank you to everybody who supports me there. I do appreciate it. Take a look at the watch movement after it's out of the cleaning machine and it's all serviced up. Take a look at that. Beautiful stuff from a 1950s Rolex. Now, I am going to replace the mainspring on this watch. Again, we're going to keep the original mainspring. It can always be put back in or kept, for whatever reason. But to make this watch run the best, I think a new mainspring is in order, as it's obvious that this watch has not been serviced in a long time. So the first thing I need to do is put what they call braking grease around the outside edge of the barrel wall. That's where the mainspring will rub, and you don't want metal on metal there. And now I can take the new mainspring and carefully press it into the mainspring barrel. Just to be careful. We don't need the spring flying away on us. And there's a little bit of gunk on the top. I can use some Rodico to clean it up before I put the barrel arbor in place. This is what grabs onto the inside of the mainspring when you wind up your watch. That mainspring is an extremely important component of the watch. It's the power source. In fact, it's the only power source for the watch. It takes the energy that you use to either wind up the crown or to just move your arm as the automatic winding rotor spins, and it transfers it into stored energy that then gets released at a very specific interval, and that's what makes a watch run. And there's the barrel in place. Now we can begin with the train of wheels once again. This is, again, the escape wheel going in first, and it creates kind of a waterfall, starting with the mainspring barrel on the left, and then there's a series of wheels that move all the way down to that escape wheel where the power flows through. And each time it goes from one wheel to the next, the ratio is changed as well. So the mainspring barrel turns very, very slowly, but the escape wheel, the last wheel in the chain, goes very, 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 very quickly. And this is the center wheel going into place as well. Everything has to be kind of balanced here. And before we put on the bridges, that we do need to remember to put on the setting lever screw, because it actually goes underneath the bridge. And we'll start off with the barrel bridge. And as you can see, its job is to hold the barrel in place. And we can screw that down. This is pretty risk-free. There's no pivots on this. It's just the top of the barrel there. So this one you can be normal with, I would say. This one you have to be extra careful with, though, because this one has 4 different pivot holes on the top, and they all have to be perfectly aligned before you can tack it down. And it's just about there. And there it is. I got to say, these Rolex movements are just unbelievable to work on. That thing just fell into place. Like, I had to do almost nothing to get that bridge lined up. That can be an hour. That can be a 15-minute job on a lesser movement, let's say, but this one's just made so well. I'm going to put a little bit of medium viscosity oil between where the barrel and the barrel bridge meet, just to reduce any friction there. And while we're here, I can put on the click spring and the click. The click is like a ratchet. It allows the ratchet wheel to turn one direction, but not the other. And interestingly, the click is what makes the sound when you wind up your watch. A lot of people think it's the wheels and gears churning away when you wind, but it's not. It's actually that click, that little tiny piece that sits up against the ratchet wheel. And if you get really into watches, you'll notice a difference in the sound and feel between the different winding of different types of watches. It's kind of fun. It's one of the little details, Okay, now we can continue the rebuild and go for the crown wheel. And again, a little bit of the medium viscosity oil on the rim here. This is where the wheel will be turning, and you want to make sure that it is low friction. And as you can see, it's secured via two little tiny screws on top of that plate. There's a decent amount of torque that runs through that wheel. So as you can see, it's quite well secured to the movement, and it's also bolstered quite well. These are very, very small screws, and you have to be very careful with them. With that, we can flip the movement over and start doing the keyless works now. This is the sliding clutch right here, as well as the clutch wheel. And we'll set it into place carefully. And now the crown and stem can go on. And again, a little bit of blue grease. This is the more heavy duty type grease that we use on these things. Mainly there's 3 different types of oils that are used for working on a watch. There's others that you use pretty regularly as well, but you can think of it as kind of small, medium, and large. There's the very light friction oils, the medium, and then the heavy grease. All right, it looks like the keyless works is working well. And we can continue assembling it. We need to put the yoke and the yoke spring in place. That yoke spring is the one that it's a scary one. It's the one that wants to jump away. And this is it right here. So what I like to do is kind of set it on its edge and then use this black pointer stick to hold it in place and then kind of just drag it down. And as you can see, it does slip into place quite nicely, but that yoke is out of where it's supposed to be, and I don't want to have anything flying away, so I'm just going to gently set it into place, and then I can use some of the grease where that spring meets the yoke. Again, any of the friction parts, you want to have a little bit of grease there or oil, depending on which one. You can look up schematics that will tell you. You can also use best practices that you kind of learn as you go. And we'll replace the cannon pinion there. And the minute wheel. And then with that in place, we can put on the setting lever spring. The setting lever spring is kind of a dual part. It is a spring that acts on the setting lever itself, but it's also a cover plate that covers up 3 or 4 different things. And just a quick test to make sure that it's working. And it looks like it is, which means we can continue with the calendar side. We're over here anyway, we might as well. And this one is also spring-loaded and a little tricky because we do have to get everything lined up properly in order to put this tension spring in place. This is kind of like a jumper spring for the calendar. It's what makes it click over when the new day comes. And it's held in place by this screw. And as you can see, I'm trying to kind of hold everything together there. And again, a little bit of grease. Anytime a spring meets up with a part means that it'll operate smoothly and not produce anything horrible like shards of metal in the movement. It doesn't take much. I mean, even a tiny hair can stop a movement, so you can't have metal flying around in there, of course. Okay, now I can put the hour wheel in place. And now I can put the calendar wheel as well. It's a little tricky to get put in, but once it is, it stays firmly because it's being held on by the friction from a spring. And then I can tighten it down. Okay, and there you go. You can see that when I put it into this time setting position, it turns the hour wheel, the minute wheel, as well as the calendar. And with that, that means that we can move to the exciting part, which is where we're going to see how well this thing's going to run, and of course, if it's going to run. We'll start with the pallet fork and the pallet fork bridge. And we'll give it a quick wind and make sure that the pallet fork, yes, and yes, jumps back and forth off of the screwdriver there. And the reason for that is because it's holding that power in and releasing it at very specific intervals, which is exactly what we want. That means I can tighten down the pallet fork bridge. And that means it's time for the balance. So let's see if we can get this thing running. Let's go. Come on. Oh, geez, that thing kicked right up. Beautiful. You love to see that. Again, it came to me as not running, but as we realized after having taken it apart that it actually did run a bit. But this is what you want to see right here. Because this gives us some hope that this watch is going to be able to run really well. And it's just nice to kind of take that in to see this watch that's been in service for so long, doing so well, and actually running well again. So the first thing we'll do here is oil up the jewels. And that means we'll start with this cap jewel assembly that goes on top of the balance itself. And this is, of course, a little two-part setup here. There's a cap jewel and then a setting. And what I want to do is I want to put them in a solvent so that I dissolve any of those old oils that are on top. And then what I can do just to make sure is take the cap jewel and use a little bit of pegwood to clean it off manually and then put it back into the solvent. And that should make a perfectly clean surface for me to work on. And what I need to do with that is I need to put some oil on it. And by some, I mean an absolutely tiny amount of oil right there in the center, just like that. And then I can put the jewel setting back on top and it'll actually kind of suction itself on there thanks to capillary action. And with that, I can put it back in the watch movement here. Carefully, carefully. There we go. And it falls right into place. And then I can simply put this shock setting back into place like so. Now the other the other jewels also need to be oiled, and I'll use an oiler for this and deposit just a small amount of oil around where the pivots meet up. These also have an interesting one. They have a capped jewel for the escape wheel. The escape wheel and the balance are the ones that move the most. The escape wheel spinning quite quickly, as well as the balance. So on nicer movements like this one from Rolex, they will actually do a capped jewel on the escape wheel as well. Many watches don't do that, but this one does. And so we're going to do the same procedure here, where I take it off. The setting doesn't come out on those ones. It's just the top cap jewel. And I'll do the same thing though, where I put this droplet of oil right onto the cap jewel here, and then I can replace it in the watch movement carefully. And what it'll do is it'll suspend that droplet of oil right above the pivot where the friction is the most. And so that'll help it run really well for a long time. And now let's see the final result here on the time grapher. Ooh, look at that. Pretty good amplitude. The beat error is nice and low, and it's within, wow, 1 second today? Oh, that is absolutely incredible performance from a watch this old. I'm really, really happy with that. It also means that we can turn our attention to the case. Now, I mentioned I'm not going to be refinishing this case. No way would I do that. I'll be honest, even if the owner asked me, I would say no. I'd say you'd have to take it to somebody else, because this case is just the most gorgeous patinaed case I've ever seen. And there is no way that I would do that. But I will be cleaning it, and I'm using the ultrasonic cleaner here to do so. This is a non-abrasive way to clean a lot of different watch parts, but definitely the case and the bracelet and stuff like that. Now, taking it out of the ultrasonic though, I noticed that we do need to remove and replace the gasket inside the crown tube, and it is toast. This is what I was talking about. The gasket, they turn from like a pliable rubber into this horrible mess. Now it does get worse than this. This one at least has chunks that I can break off and remove. Sometimes it turns into almost like a tar that is extremely difficult to get out. But as you can see, one piece at a time, and oh, this really satisfying last piece also means that I have now cleaned that up. I'm going to put it in some isopropyl alcohol just to help dissolve or get rid of any of the rubber gaskets that's left there. But as you can see, it's nice and clean now, as is the rest of the movement. I'm going to use a little bit of silicone grease here. This goes on the inside where the gasket will go, and it helps keep it supple and also make sure that the watch is as waterproof as we can get it. That's the new gasket. And I'm once again just going to use a little bit of silicone grease cleaner here on the outside of it as well. And now I can put it into place. It's a little bit tricky because it doesn't want to quite sit. But as you can see, once I get it over that lip, it is good to go. So that gasket is all ready to go. Now this one's kind of weird. It's got some type of corrosion in the bottom of it inside the crown. And I'm going to try to just clean out as much of that as I can. And I'm even going to just throw it back in the ultrasonic cleaner for a minute. And there we go, much improved. And once again, I'm going to do the same procedure here. This is important to try to keep it as watertight as possible. Of course, getting any type of water into a watch like this is a disaster. So we want to try to prevent that. And I'm going to replace the gasket once again. And this one just goes inside the crown. These type of Rolexes use 3 different gaskets. They use one in the crown tube, one in the crown itself, and then one on the case back. Now, when it comes to the crystal, I've sourced a new crystal for this watch. As you can see, it's perfect. It's brand new. And in order to put it on, I can just simply hand press it onto the front. But of course, it needs that outer ring to tighten it down. And that's also what the bezel will go on. So once I get the thing aligned properly, there's that little window that's a magnifier. They call that the Cyclops. I need to get that above the date window, but now I can replace this outer ring and I can use my Rober press. This is a brand of watch presses to press that into place. And as you can see, one little turn at a time until it meets up with the case, and then I'm good to go. And what that'll do is it'll create a watertight seal around the outside of where that crystal sits. Nice. So that looks good, and a new crystal looks really good. Now I can take a look at the calendar here as well. I'm going to use a little bit of Rodico. It's kind of like adult silly putty, like it's for it's for using all different types of things just to rub away any grease or anything that maybe had gotten onto the date disc. I don't want to go crazy with it though, because the more you go, the more you risk, removing some of the ink that makes up the numbers. And I'm not willing to take that risk here, but I can replace this calendar carefully by pulling over the little tension spring and then letting go once it's in place, just like that. So that's set up. Now we can turn our attention to the automatic winding works, which of course have been completely disassembled as well. And for the reversing wheels, I'm using a lubricant / cleaner called Lubetta. And basically it deposits a very thin layer of lubricant onto the wheels, but also lets you clean them because they can be kind of tricky to clean. You can't disassemble them fully. Okay. Now I can put the reversing wheels on their little posts here. And then I can set it back into place on the automatic winding works. This, of course, is important for the performance of the watch, as this is what will allow it to be wound without having you actually wind the thing every day. And you want that to be a nice, efficient system so that it stays fully wound. Okay, now I can use a little bit of the finest viscosity oil that we have to oil the jewels on the top. This is a fully jeweled movement. The jewels are those red rubies. They are actually real rubies, although they're synthetic. But it's interesting because synthetic rubies produce rubies that are indistinguishable from rubies that were made in the wild, as it were. Okay, now we can replace the dial carefully. Also, I noticed some stuff with the dial here. The font on the dial looked a little bit different from the ones that I had found online. This looks actually like the GMT Master font on a later model. And it made me wonder. So I reached out to some industry people that I know, acquaintances, basically. I reached out to Mark Kozlerich, who works over at Hodinkee, which is a huge watch website if you haven't seen it. And he put me in contact with Andrew Shear from Shear Time, who's a well-known vintage watch dealer. And Andrew told me that he believes that the dial has been refinished at some point because of the font and stuff like that. And that would not shock me. That was something that was somewhat common to do back in the day. That is something that people would not do now. Even a beat up dial would be better than refinishing. But that does seem to be the case for this watch. And it's just a part of its story. You know, every watch from this era has been serviced and polished and had a whole bunch of stuff done to it. And it looks like the dial may have been refinished on this particular one. Did want to say thanks to Mark and Andrew for taking the time to answer my emails from a random person. That was very nice of them. Okay, now we can start to put the hands back in place as well. This is the 24-hour GMT hand. So this is the one that is the auxiliary hour hand that points to a spot on the bezel that lets you track that extra time zone that I was talking about before. And then we can follow that up with the normal hour hand. This is commonly referred to as a Mercedes hand because of the shape of the around that circle there. That actually has a functional element. It has nothing to do with Mercedes. The shape inside that Y shape that you see is there to hold the luminous material, because when it's applied, it's liquid. And if you have this huge space that's just an empty circle, it won't evenly distribute, and it makes it very difficult to make it luminous. So they put those bars in there so that the luminous material would have somewhere to kind of hang out before it dried. But it kind of looks like a Mercedes logo, so people call it a Mercedes hand. Okay, now the seconds hand can go on after the minutes hand. As you can see, there's 4 hands in the stack here. Quite a few. And that means that I can now recase this watch. Still can't believe that I'm actually getting to work on this watch. This is also, by the way, just personally one of my favorite watch models from Rolex. I love the GMT. I've done a lot of traveling in my life, and the idea of having a watch that's kind of your travel companion is really cool to me. And this is the original. This is the one. All right, now I can replace the crown and stem here. I can just tighten it down and then replace it. Ooh, it's starting to come together. Are you getting excited? I know I am. Making sure that the hands in the calendar click over, which it looks like they're doing just fine. And then I can put the crown back into place. Or actually, can I put the crown back into place? Huh. Well, that's not good. It looks like the threads don't want to grab. Oh no, that is not good at all. I need to inspect here. I feel like maybe the threads on the inside of the crown are toasted though. All right, well, let's take the movement back out of the case here and do a little bit of inspecting on this crown situation here. Can I get it to grab? It is supposed to be threaded, and yeah, it won't grab at all. I think I have a theory on this. My guess is that you can see the threads here. They look fine. There's threads on the inside of this crown though, and you can still see them there, but I think the reason that it was holding on before is that there was so much dirt that it just kind of seized on, and now that's not going to work anymore. So I did source a crown. This is a used, but the same crown as the one that went with it. And let's see if it'll fit on. Yeah, look at that. Immediately it just grabs right on. So that's another thing that we're going to have to replace here is the crown on this watch, as it looks silly with the crown sticking out, and also it doesn't function properly. So in order to replace a crown, this should be pretty straightforward. I can use a pin vise here to remove the old crown. So I hold it steady, and you can just do it with your fingers. It doesn't take that much torque to actually remove a crown. Okay, and then to put the new one on, I'm going to use some Loctite. This is the lightest Loctite. It only sort of holds it steady, but doesn't lock it up forever. And it's just a liquid that you can put on that will help keep threads engaged and keep the crown steady. I shouldn't have to do any trimming here since it's the exact same crown type that I'm replacing it with. Sometimes if you change crowns, you might have to trim the stem because it changes the length a little bit, but that shouldn't be the case here. So let's try again. Once again, we'll secure it into the case, and yeah, that is much better. So that works. Now we can put, again, I mentioned the 3 different gaskets. This is the third one that goes onto the case back itself. And I can also move forward with the automatic winding works and get that installed here. It's a little tricky because the rotor kind of flops around, but once you get it seated, it sits down nicely. And we can get that screwed into place as well. Oh boy, this thing is almost finished. This feels really good. I'm excited for this one. Even the case back is gorgeous on this. I don't care. Look at that wear. You can't replicate that. And we'll get it sealed back down. Okay, now what's missing here? Well, the bezel. And we need to dedicate a little bit of time to the bezel here. Again, I have to be really, really careful with this, but also it needs to be cleaned up. That is just gross, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use some pegwood to help try to get the big chunks off of the bezel. I do not want to put this into the ultrasonic cleaner though. I'm not 100% sure how it would act with the loom that's on the underside here of that Bakelite part. And I'm just a little worried that it might knock some of it loose or something. So I'm not going to take the risk. Now this is a spring that keeps the tension on the bezel, and I'm going to take that out. And then we can clean that as well as the bezel itself. But I'm just going to do it by hand, and I'm just going to put it in some water. That's it. I am not going to get super tricky here. I am just going to take a brush and put it in some water and just get the big chunks of debris off of it. That's kind of my goal for this thing. I don't need to get inside and clean every single little everything about it. It just needs to be back to clean enough, and then I can put it back onto the watch and I'll feel fine with it. Again, I'm terrified of this thing. Yeah, that is a toothbrush, by the way. And you can also see what happened to the water to show you how dirty it got. But yeah, I just really want to be ultra careful with this bezel because it is just irreplaceable. You just can't find these. If you can, they're thousands and thousands of dollars. And of course, this is the original as well. I'm going to use a little bit of this silicone grease around the outside where the spring meets up with the inside part of the aluminum or steel, I should say, bezel here. And then the spring just kind of clicks back into place here. Yeah, just like that. And that means I can put it back on, and I should just be able to click it on with my thumbs here. I don't need any special tool to do this. Yeah, there. They clicked onto place, and again, looks like no damage or anything like that. And holy smokes. If this isn't the most beautiful vintage watch I've ever held in my hand, I don't know what is. It is absolutely stunning. That deep blue, the dark red, everything coming together so beautifully on this watch. Oh, I love it. I absolutely love it. I'm sad to have to send it back, but I certainly can't afford a watch like this. I'll tell you that. All right. Now, one thing that needs to be replaced for sure are the spring bars. I got real Rolex ones for this. And as for the bracelet, I actually had a bracelet that's the same type that fits this watch already. It came on a different watch that I had bought a long time ago. And I'm going to use that bracelet because I cannot find the end link for this. And I'd rather just put the bracelet on that I know is going to hold up. Take a look at the before picture. This is when we got it onto the bench. And now look at the after. I am so happy with the way that this thing came out. There's another before picture of the bezel and the crystal, and look at it now. Oh, I am so happy that I got to work on this watch. This is a dream come true for me. It is an absolutely stunning watch, and I am thrilled with how it came out as well. Thank you so much for coming along with me for this journey. This was easily the most nerve-wracking watch I've ever had to work on because of its value, both sentimental and monetary, and how fragile that bezel is. But I have to say it was 100% worth it after seeing how it came out. I do have an Instagram, by the way, for Wristwatch Revival. If you want to catch up with me over there, it's wristwatch_revival. I'd love to say hi. And I'd love it if you check out my Instagram page. And yeah, that's going to do it for this one. An unbelievable watch and an unbelievable experience getting to work on it. And hopefully I'll get to work on stuff like this again down the line. We'll see you next time.